Alright, so I mostly use foam for everything, including the gauntlet, mostly the horns, and I'll tell you why. I see a lot of people with horns made out of things like plaster or paper clay. The problem with them is they're very heavy and they're very brittle. And with something like paper mache, it's light, it's great, but it's really, really difficult to get a smooth texture. So the main thing I use is pink insulation foam. Do you guys know that stuff? The wall board, Pink Panther on it? It's the stuff. You don't need any more than hot glue and an X-Acto knife to work with that. Alright. That said, the downside, it's very, very messy to work with. And when you're going with something lightweight, you are sacrificing some strength. It's pretty tough if you do it right. I run into walls, I'll admit. I mean, you're suddenly considerably wider than you used to be. But you can't wear this stuff LARPing because it will just explode. But if you're just cosplaying, you're okay. And even the horns I have now, the main part is insulation foam with just liquid latex built up around it, and they're just glued to my forehead. So you get the idea, the weight tends not to be an issue. This whole rig is about a pound. This is why I could wear it yesterday. I wore that thing for 10 hours yesterday.
Nice.
Alright. Let's see. Normally I would have something to pass around, but I had some issues packing in that I had a suit of armor and a whole other costume to put in, so I don't have anything to pass. Actually, I'll pass this. This is insulation foam and EVA foam. So I'll just pass it around and you'll see why I work with foam.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Everyone expects it to be a lot heavier than it
This
is.
weighs nothing. Nothing at all.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I haven't actually made anything out of cardboard. Two reasons. One, cardboard has that kind of ripple texture, and it's really hard to get rid of that. Okay. But two, once it's bent, that's it. You can't really fix that. And I mean, cardboard's nice and it's cheap, but it's kind of like a one-time thing, really.
Tiff,
I haven't done anything
like
major
too.
with it just because of the fall back.
Those are ours too.
But yeah, so with foam, you
yeah,
don't need any
volunteers.
fancy tools. If you're working with things like EVA foam, which is what this part is made out of, it is advantageous to have something like a Dremel, any sort of rotary tool. But for the insulation foam, sandpaper and an X-Acto blade is all you need. I do recommend, if you're going to do it in the living room or something, lay down garbage bags or something to stand because you get a lot of pink dust. And please wear a mask because you do not need that in your lungs. Nobody needs pink insulation lungs. Can't imagine they breathe well. But yeah, so I use a combination of insulation foam, and I usually coat it in wood glue. The reason for this, the wood glue soaks into the foam a little, and then when you add some layers, you get this almost hard, plasticky coating, so it tends to be a little more durable. It does add to the weight a little, and it makes it a little more likely to chip, but you get a much better surface than you would with straight foam, because the paint will soak into the foam. And I also recommend, if you're going to paint it, you need to seal it, especially if you're using anything with an aerosol. Spray paint melts this foam. It bubbles and it ripples and it's gone, it's done, it's over. Give up, throw it out, it's terrifying and it stinks and toxic fumes, so please seal your foam. So, I'm just going to kind of walk through the basic process of what I do when I make these, straight from patterning to how you gonna mount them. I do recommend when you start something, you want to think about all the steps before you actually start cutting foam, because you don't want to have to last minute completely rearrange things, because you end up, it just makes it a lot more difficult. Alright, so when I do a pattern, the this is really a great example because this one's pretty complicated, but when you're doing something like, actually Heather, can I borrow your headdress? This was something I did as a commission piece this summer. Right. So these horns look like a more complicated shape than they are. They're not. It is literally 2 pieces of foam. I usually buy the 3/4 of an inch thickness just because it's the easiest to cut a straight line without the blade shifting. It comes all the way up to about 2 inches thick, depending on what you want. But yeah, you do a flat sketch, and for something like this, this is just this shape. That straight out curve just as is. 2 pieces. You want to cut them bigger than the pattern. So I would draw the pattern, usually on a piece of paper, and then gift wrap paper. You know that tissue paper you buy at the dollar store?
Mm-hmm.
That is the stuff for patterning. Whether you're doing like fabric or what, but especially for this, it's really convenient just because you trace it onto that with a pencil, lay it on your foam, and if you take a Sharpie, it leads right through onto the foam. And it doesn't put scratches in the surface of the foam. So once you have your pattern on the foam, you just cut it out with the X-Acto blade. I will tell you now, make sure you have lots of X-Acto blades because this stuff blunts it like nobody's business. Some people buy blade sharpeners and stuff. I buy my blades at the dollar store. You know. Yeah, so when you're cutting it out, you want to overcut it. Leave yourself about 1/2 centimeter outside the line. If you're doing the inside horn, leave yourself a little more. And I tell you this because when you're cutting, it does have a tendency to chunk. It tears out in pieces. Do you know like regular styrofoam, how it comes out, it leaves holes? This will do that to a small extent if you're not careful. So it's better to leave the extra foam. We can sand it off later. It's pretty straightforward. What do you think? Yeah, okay. So once you have it, you have your 2 pieces or however many pieces. This, for the record, because it's such a complicated shape and it has a curve in more than one direction, this is about 14 layers of foam stacked to get the curve. So the main piece here, this was the flat. So this longest piece is about 2 or 3 layers of about 1.5 inches thick foam with 1 extra piece laid here. And then each layer, as I went, I stacked another to get that outwards curve as it curved around. Pretend you're playing Minecraft. And it looks like Lego blocks. I don't recommend something like that from the get-go because you get lost really easy, and the hardest part is making the second floor. Yeah, so you have your pieces, something like this, 2 pieces per horn, hot glue them together. I will tell you, less is more with the hot glue just because if you put too much on, it melts the foam and you end up with holes through the middle. And it can weaken it, so just sparingly on the glue, make sure you cover the surface area. If you're doing something really big, because a lot of people use the same foam for large props. Yes?
Regular hot glue or that extra hot glue?
Low temp preferably, but I have a glue gun that I got like 10 years ago. I don't know what it is. It's just always been in the house. I think it was my mother's. Lower temperature preferably because it will melt foam, but it really doesn't matter. I don't think. I don't know. I would just use the same gun. But yeah, so put them together. Less is more on the hot glue. Just again melts the foam. Give them a chance to dry, and then you can start actually shaping it. So what I do, you have your one basic shape, but to get it rounded off like that, you want to basically peel it like it's a potato skin. You take the X-Acto blade, don't follow my knife safety, cut towards your friend, not yourself. I'm forever like cutting through fast. So learn from my mistakes and don't bleed because that also soaks into the foam. Not that I've learned that the hard way. But yeah, so basically shave it a little bit at a time and kind of work your way around. down, round the edges. Take it easy and be really careful on inside curves. With those, I usually leave them pretty rough because the stuff sands really easily. So yeah, you get the rough shape, and then you want to kind of think, how are these going to be mounted? When I do the pattern, I usually leave about 2 or 3 inches extra on the base, regardless of what I'm making, just so that I can kind of figure out how it's going to sit. For something like this, I shaped these pieces on a plaster cast in my face that my lovely friend Sammy did. So it helps to have a friend. Just because where it's going to be glued, it needs to kind of follow the curve of my face a little. But for something like this, mostly I just want to make sure that when I'm wearing it, the horns are going to sit at the right angle. In the case of this, I needed to know that I would have clearance for my shoulders. I barely have clearance for my shoulders. So it's good to have that extra slack. That can be cut off later. It's usually good to cut that off before you start gluing because it becomes a lot more difficult with the glue coating. But yeah, I do recommend leaving extra slack at the bottom. So once you got the rough shape, we move into sanding. This is when you bust out your dust mask, lock your cat in the bedroom. If they're like my cats, they like to try to eat the foam. I don't understand why. Apparently it looks appetizing. Then again, my brother's cat will eat rocks so she can swallow them. So she's a little special. But yeah, so you might want to write this down if anyone has it. There's 2 numbers for sandpaper grit that I want you to remember. 150, 220. They're my preferred. I've used them on all my horns. They just seem to work best. So now that you're the foam, I will recommend have lots of sandpaper. Don't hesitate to switch to new pieces right away, just because when it gets a curve too much, your sandpaper will get lines and ridges, or just spots where some of the grit has gone. That will leave scratches in the foam. If you're not careful, it will take a gouge. So just be wary of that. Fresh sandpaper is your friend. I mean, the stuff's like 5 sheets for $3 at Walmart, so you're not breaking the bank. It's always good to have extra stuff. But yeah, so sandpaper, kind of get that curve. I will mention now, actually, let me take a drink first. Sorry, guys. At this point, if something happens and say you have a spot where the hot glue has burnt a hole through it, and that has happened with this. In the case of this, where I have on the inside of the horn here, it's kind of cut out, it's lowered in. This right here, I actually had a lot of chunks missing and everything like this. So while you're doing your peeling and you're shaving it down, keep some of those pieces to the side. Because if you have somewhere with a hole or a gap or whatever that you want to fill, you put a little bit of hot glue, stick that down, you can sand over that and basically blend it in. A little bit later I'll talk about how to fill in the seams and stuff, but for bigger holes you want to fill it in with the foam. So it's pretty forgiving. You can add more. With these, I had changed my mind about halfway through about the curve for the lower horn. So I literally just lopped them off, cut a wedge out, and glued them back on. So, I mean, it's literally all foam and hot glue, so it's not like you're doing anything to it that you haven't already done to build the main structure. So, it's pretty forgiving. Also, I did mention a sheet of that, 8 feet long, however many feet wide, 3/4 of an inch thick. Home Depot is $8. You usually have to snap it in half to get in the car, but sorry, you're gonna cut it anyway. Yeah, so once you've sanded it, you get those holes filled in. Now we're gonna move in to detailing. Now, I don't recommend things like ridges right away because they're pain in the butt. You might get discouraged or frustrated. For something like these horns, where I was determined to do ram horns for some reason, the base I had done with a fine paintbrush with sandpaper, thank you, wrapped around it to kind of get that. And then about here I said, I've had enough and I got out the Dremel. And just did that for the rest of them. they're not as nice, but they're there. And given that they literally cover the entire thing, I was gonna take any time-saving opportunity I could. So you can Dremel this. I usually don't, just because it takes it away so fast that you don't have the control. And for something like EVA foam, you need that, but this stuff sands so easy that it's kind of like overkill. You know, it's like you're going out bird hunting with a Gatling gun. It's just not necessary. So you definitely don't need a rotary tool, but if you're doing something like that, maybe, if you're lazy like me. All right, so you get your details in, you're happy with the shape, it's all good to go. You put some thought into how it's gonna mount. Now we're gonna move into sealing and hiding seams. So this, as I mentioned, has about 14 pieces of foam stacked to get that curve. Can you see any seams?
Nope.
No.
That's where the real magic comes in. My best friend when I'm doing this is that tube that every store sells called polyfill wall filler. You know that stuff you buy at the hardware store to fill in tack holes in your walls?
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is perfect. So usually what I do, once I have my shape all figured out, it's all good to go, I hit it with one coat of LePage wood glue. You know that awful stuff in the big yellow bottle? It's goop, has a really terrible consistency and smells like school glue? That stuff.
Do you water it down, or do
Nope.
you just straight?
I just straight on.
Do you use Mod Podge? Would you use that over Mod Podge or Mod
Mod Podge I usually use before I paint it,
Okay.
but for this, I like the wood glue just because it's really hard. That said, you want to do your sanding first because I don't care if it says sandable on the bottle, it's not. It's full of lies. But yeah, so you put one coat of that down, it's gonna soak in and you're gonna get this weird texture on the horns. They're gonna be really, really, really rough all of a sudden. Don't panic, it's okay. That's a good thing. Because now that it's super rough and you've got that one first coating of hard stuff, I bust out the wall filler and I usually have a little palette knife. Everyone know what a palette knife is? Okay, it's a little tool that they use for mixing paint or putting paint on canvas, usually oil paint. Tends to have a handle and it usually has about a diamond shape of metal, really flat on one end. They come really tiny, or they come really thin or round or like big ones. Yeah, you can get whatever shape you want. I just get like a standard one. The one I have because my mother's boyfriend was cleaning out his old wife's stuff and had all this art supplies that she got and never used, and he was like, here, do you want this? And I was like, yes. So now I have palette knives, but they cost like $2 at an art store, so. Yeah, so
$1
one-
at the Sarah's right now.
Yes, there you go. Or you can use a butter knife. Just don't eat with that butter knife out. You have a little less control, but it'll do the job. So I take that and I literally scrape it on and I put it onto the seams like I'm putting plaster on walls. So just kind of squish it down, leave some extra, get it to the sides, make them look real messy. And you take every seam you have, cover it with that stuff. It took a very long time for this. This not so much because there was one seam down the center. It's done. Yeah, so you fill that out, and this is where the 220 grit sandpaper comes in. The nice thing about the crack filler, it only takes about an hour to dry till it's sandable. Sometimes I'm really impatient and just hit it like after 30 minutes and then there's wet spots. Yes?
Did you say you spread the crack filler around the entire surface? Or
No, just over the seams and like the immediate area around the seams. So about a centimeter wide, centered on the seam. You don't need much. If you have any like little holes or pock marks, you can fill it in with that. The only thing with that is if you go too thick, it's very brittle and it doesn't dry all the way. If you're filling in something larger, do lots of little layers. I would prefer if you had used the foam earlier, just because that's not gonna weaken. It's also backed by hot glue, so it's gonna be tougher. So yeah, you cover all your seams with that. Once it's dry, that's where we get the 220 grit sandpaper. The nice thing about this, the 220 grit will sand that wall filler really, really easily. but it takes a lot more work to sand the foam with wood glue on it. So you can sand those seams flush with everything else without losing any of the rest of the horns. It may smooth down the rougher texture a little, but that's fine. And it's good to do it right after that first layer of wood glue because that's when the surface is at its roughest, and that means it will stick the best. So once you've done that, you've got it all sanded down, it's all good to go. You're gonna put on at least 2 more coats of wood glue. But this is where you gotta kind of consider what surface are you going for. Because the more layers of wood glue you add, the smoother it's gonna get. It's not self-leveling like some things are, but it's tacky enough that it will do a little bit. It's like nail polish. It will bubble, it'll drip, it'll whatever, but it generally goes pretty smooth. And as long as you haven't let it dry out, it doesn't show brush strokes too bad. So with the wood glue, I usually put like a loony sized amount on my palette at a time, just so I don't risk it getting tackier. But really, it depends on what you're doing and what you're going for. You might want that rough texture. But this is the time when you need to make that decision. So something like this, I only did 1 coat after for the fingers because I wanted that really rough texture. This was about 2 coats after, but for this, I did about 3 or 4, just because I needed that really smooth texture. You can also, if you coat it in gesso afterwards, you can sand that really smooth. So you do have to bear in mind before you start painting what kind of surface you want. For metal, I usually say about 4 coats. But for something like bone or horn or stone, you want 1 or 2. Again, something like the very tips of the horns, you want to either coat it, in this case I have my ornament here, which is warbler, but in the other, I do recommend putting a few extra coats just on the tip, just because that's where it's more prone to chip. The nice thing though is, worst case scenario, you break it, you chip it, something happens to it, you'll have to repaint part of it, that's true, but you can fix it the same way you built it. Hot glue it back on, trim the edges, fill it in with the filler, recoat it in wood glue, and then repaint it. It may be a little weakened there depending on how it was cut or broken, but generally you can fix it fairly well. I have broken things. Not these, yet, but it happens. So yeah, now you've got that with all the wood glue. Let's see where we are. I have this kind of in front of me, but mostly I'm just sort of rambling, so.
So do you cover in Mod Podge after you paint to seal the paint?
Yeah, depending on what you're going for. If you're gonna aerosol it, 2 coats of Mod Podge, make sure you cover everything. That said, if you're gonna glue it to something, like in the case of these, don't put anything on the bare foam at the attachment point. And I'll tell you this why. Your hold is only as secure as the surfaces they're attached to. So if you put a coat of wood glue, that wood glue is what is holding your horns on. It can chip, it can break, it's very thin. If you have the bare foam, you're anchoring the foam itself to the attachment point. So if you're gonna cover it in spray paint, what I usually do, take painter's tape and make sure you cover it well, just so that none of it's showing. You may have some spots that you have to touch up by hand at the base, but that way you don't have to worry about melting your foam. Nobody wants to, make these beautiful set of horns and then melt it at the last stem. So if you're gonna aerosol it, something like Mod Podge is a definite must. Mod Podge or some similar sealant of some sort, just not aerosol can spray stuff, because that's just get you back to square one. Something brush on. If you're not, I usually hand paint things, to be honest. When I did my Lady Loki last year, I had spray painted the horns. The trouble with that though is, if you chip it, you have to get out the spray paint again. You can't just spot fix it, which is a bit of a problem if you've done some additional detail and paint on top. You risk losing it. But some people just like the spray paint coat. It's up to you. I was a visual artist before I started cosplaying, so that's kind of the way I'm coming at this from. I'm a big fan of dry brushing.
What's that?
That a dry brush is the paintbrush is mostly dry. You take a bit of paint and you brush most of it off, and then you can do the detailing like that. The gun, I don't know where that ended up.
Stop there.
Okay, I'll show you guys what I mean. But I can get more into painting later. All of the shiny bits along the edges or whatever was done through dry brushing. Kind of hit it rough with very little paint, and it gives it more of a weathered look. Weathering is the most fun part, by the way. You guys haven't done that yet? Oh baby, it's the most fun. You're literally making it dirty, which is a little strange after you put all that effort into it, but that's fine. It's fun.
Do you recommend a bristle brush for that?
Depends what you're doing. Like a chip brush is great if you're doing something like a big sword.
As opposed to a foam brush.
Yeah, the foam brush, you don't really get the effect you're looking for. If I'm doing like something like weathering, like on this, coarse brushes. Usually oil paint brushes tend to be coarser. But you know what also works great? You know those paint brushes that you've forgotten to wash and all the paint's dried into them? Or they're ruined by glue and Mod Podge in them? They're the best for that. But we'll get into that in a minute. Yeah, so, let me see. Yeah, if you're gonna like spray paint it or something like that, you wanna seal it first. If you're gonna dry brush, especially if you want a really smooth texture, I generally just use acrylic gesso. It's pretty inexpensive. Any store with an art supply section sells acrylic gesso. I do recommend, if you're gonna buy it from a place like Desserres, just because it's cheaper. If you get it from Markles, I promise you, swear to God, they mark up the art supplies half again the price. Don't do that to yourself.
What was the name of that store? I've never heard of it, sorry.
Desserres, they have an online store. It's Desserres. Yes, Tiff, I know it's French, but I am not French. I know I'm mangling it. I don't care. You get the idea.
That's okay.
Desserres.
It's just on the end of Barrington Street.
Yes, there is one actually just down the road, yeah.
It used to be called Loomis and Tolles a
Yes.
few years ago here.
Yep. It was Loomis and Tolles, and then it was just Loomis, and then it was bought by Desserres, I believe. I don't know. Yes?
What was the name of the product?
Acrylic gesso. That's spelled Gesso. It's basically a thick white primer. Yes?
So is this what you're putting over, where we kind of start with the 2 layers of wood glue and this goes over the glue?
Yes. The reason I picked gesso, its purpose is to stick to canvas for painting. So it's pretty thick. It's a very, very opaque white. You don't need many layers. It will cover everything pretty good, and it'll stick to just about everything. It also has the added advantage, it's not crazy flexible, but it does have a bit of forgiveness to it. Don't be bending it in half, but if you shift just like while wearing something, it's not gonna just blow off in chunks. It might wear away in stress points, and it might chip a little if you beat on it, but it's a little more forgiving than some other things. So acrylic gesso, I definitely recommend. Yes?
And if you're, gesso comes in like with plummets and stuff like that, so if you're wanting some like surface, can you use it at that point, or do you?
You can, yeah. At any point, once like you've got the wood glue down, this is when we've moved into the painting and sealing phase. So whatever artistic choices you want to do, this is the time.
I don't think it comes with
Yeah, so you can get gesso with plummets already in it.
Oh,
And
cool.
all sorts of things.
Oh, I didn't know. I know Mod Podge is.
Yeah.
Oh man, you go into any art store in the artistic medium section, they have the strangest things. Oh my goodness. Like Liquitex is a brand, and they sell this stuff, and it's like this white stuff with like these black chunks of like volcanic rock or something in it. And I'm like, I don't understand what you would use that for, but I want it. It comes with glitter and everything. Like there's these things with like fabric fibers and everything in it. I'm like, gotta try that out. Fancy. It's for people who do like really intricate pictures that don't actually look like anything. That's what that's for. I'm sorry if there's any abstract artists in the room, but I'm not sorry. But yeah, another advantage to gesso, and the reason I recommend it for if you're doing metal, it's very sandable. So again, with the 220 grit, just do circles, don't do lines, you'll put scratches. Circular motion, you can get it so smooth to the touch, it's insane. It's way smoother than your paint will go. So, this was like silk to touch at first, and then of course I had to paint it, but gesso. I sound like an advertisement. All right, so once you've done that, when I paint it, actually, take a step back. Mount it now. Once you get the wood glue or the like primer or whatever, I like to mount it. So this is something you need to have figured out from the beginning, and how you mount it kind of depends on what you're wearing it with and the size of it. So something like this, I knew that I would be wearing it with a wig with dreadlocks, so I could get away with hiding a much larger headband. In the case of this, I'm going to very carefully tilt it. This is two headbands attached together at the points and coated in tape so that when they flexed, it would be less likely to weaken them. I'm still deathly afraid. As long as it survives the costume contest judging tomorrow, it can do whatever the hell it wants. You have to get through that. Knock on wood. So with something like that, you can use that. I don't know if anyone saw me last year. I went as the forest spirit from Princess Mononoke, and I had this ridiculous set of antlers that barely fit through doors, and it turned out barely fit in my friend's car. I nearly had a heart attack. We had to put it in sideways and prop it up on bags and hope the best. So, check your fit first. In the case of that though, where I was wearing it with drapey fabric, I could hide a lot more. I needed a harder surface, so with the length of them, they wouldn't be waving around and weakening at the base. So it's mounted on a colander. That, for anyone unfamiliar with culinary terms, is a noodle strainer. I went to the dollar store and I bought one of those like $1 Betty Crocker noodle strainers with the handle, because it was vaguely egg-shaped, and I sawed the handle off and I wore it on my head for a weekend. Whatever.
Hey, it works.
Hey,
Whatever works.
whatever works. And Facebook says I'm Pastafarian anyway, so whatever. It's all good. It's all good. You didn't see it. You wouldn't have known. Also, it already had the holes in it, so I don't have to try to drill it. Yeah, so the mounting, you can do headbands, you can do a helmet. If you're doing anything really large, I recommend the helmet method. If need be, you can attach your wig directly to it if you need to hide it. For something the size of that, I had a strap that I cut off an old backpack I ruined, and it went under my chin, hidden by all of the fabric, just because it'll shift a little. With these, it's actually kind of surprising. I didn't need to add any extra elastic to the headband because of the dreadlocks. It's a lace front wig, so it was literally glued to my face and not going anywhere, but the headband just kind of nestled in with the dreads, and the dreads were pulled over and around it into a ponytail in the back. And as long as I wasn't looking down, it stayed good. It stayed pretty good. That's it. Learned from my lesson. There is a lot of bulk right at the base here, and that sits right on your temples. It gets very painful very fast. So everyone's like, oh, that must be so heavy. Nope, that's not the issue. The issue is a little more focused. But, you know, it is what it is. Live and learn. And don't be afraid to modify things after the fact. Don't do it in your hotel room at con because you're somewhat limited. And also, they don't like it if you get insulation foam all over the room. I kind of have to be careful because I work at one of the hotels, so that would come back to me in a really ugly way.
Bad karma.
Oh, yeah. When you know the RA, you don't want to see the RA. Somebody tell me the time?
7:34.
We're doing good. I love that like almost everybody checked their phone. That's right there.
Oh, that too.
The screen I'm not using. Hope you guys didn't want pictures.
That's okay.
Next year.
Next year. Maybe eventually I'll make a PowerPoint, but that requires me to remember things.
What did you use to score the detail on the thing?
Which part of the hem?
Gauntlet?
Here down or here
Yeah,
up?
actually both. What did you use to score, like for the detail?
For here down, I used an X-Acto knife because this part is EVA foam. And I kind of cleaned it up a little with the Dremel. For this, just sandpaper. Sandpaper and an X-Acto blade. It doesn't take much. It's pretty forgiving, really. Also, when you're putting things on a rounded surface, like say your forehead, you can kind of sand it away and keep checking the fit. And you can get it pretty close. Because this is literally just horn with one coat of liquid latex on the base to make it a little tackier and not porous. And then the edges are built up with literally strips of toilet paper and liquid latex painted on to get that rougher, wider surface. That's all it is.
For the gold thing, what did you use to put the detail, like the
Okay, so this is a little misleading. The crown is a separate piece and it's made out of Warbler black. I can talk about that after if you guys want. The same as the jewelry added over top. I wish I had brought the Loki horns with me because that would have been a better example of kind of beginner stuff. That was the first pronounced set of horns I had made, and the first set I had made out of EVA foam. But yeah, so if you're doing something like this, these are mounted on a base plate. This base plate is actually made out of Warbler. When I did the Lady Loki, it was EVA foam. At the time, I did not have a Dremel. So I had made all the details out of craft foam and clipped the edges with a sharp pair of scissors to get it a little more rounded. So even if you're doing that, you don't need the power tools. It helps, but they're not necessary. And I'm all about cheaper methods to do what you need. So I tend to go towards less.
So the neck piece is Warbler as well?
Yeah. I should have left that in the room, that's misleading.
What do you do to like decide whether you're gonna use foam or Warbler? Like, what goes through your mind when you're like, oh, am I gonna do EVA or pink foam or Warbler?
My approach to Warbler is, that's a lot of money. I'm going to do it for only the absolute essentials. So like if anyone saw me yesterday wearing this, all of like the weird filigree designs were Warbler. All of like the raised trim was just craft foam. Because you, even thin sheets of craft foam, you can round off the edges with a Dremel if you're very careful and don't dig in and put gouges in the rest of the foam. That's what filler's for. But, yes?
What is Warbler?
Warbler, if anyone hasn't encountered it, is thermoplastic, which is a fancy way of saying it is a sheet of plastic and some sort of fiber. I feel like it's pulp mixed together. It has about the thickness of like Bristol board, and when you heat it up, it gets soft. The problem with Warbler is it's very expensive, and it's very easy to lose control of. Because if it gets too soft, if it folds over on itself, that's it. That's it. It's folded over on itself, you're done. You can't really come back from that. So I don't use it a whole lot.
It's also really heavy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can be pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of
So-
this is like 3 times heavier than your gun.
Oh my God, really? Yes. Yes, I want to send this awesome prop.
Bring her pictures and stuff.
Oh, it's good to eat. Is it cord with anything or?
Yeah, EVA foam. There's EVA foam there.
Okay. They're beautiful.
But it does small
Adds a lot
details
of weight.
excellently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
it's
I
heavy.
usually use it just for small details. Partly is weight, partly is 90% because of the price. I'll be honest
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
It's very expensive and you have to order it online.
Yeah, like I think one sheet's something like $80-90 for a big
Yeah,
sheet.
with Warbler, you do want to buy the bigger sheet. A jumbo sheet is like $90, but a medium sheet is like 40 and is,
It's little.
it's little versus like, so it's definitely, you're better off buying the bigger sheets. But I digress. So mounting, yeah. Also, whatever you're mounting it on, I couldn't do it with, well, actually that's a lie, I did do it that. What I usually do when I'm mounting something, you can see them here, I put a screw in the base of each horn. So once it's glued on, again, just hot glue, whatever surface it is, I feed one screw, usually about this long if I have the room for it, up through. And the reason I do this is, when it's just hot glued, the horn gets bumped and it's wobbling, it's going to weaken at the base. It's more likely to tear off. If you have the
Hot glue
screw,
cracks.
Yeah.
and it's-
yeah, if you have the screw there, it doesn't have the same give. It's a little more forgiving, just because it's forcing the screw to move instead of just the glue. The screw will help hold it together. Yes?
I've bashed those horns on car doors and walls and everything, and they're still going.
Well, there's nothing quite like forgetting you're suddenly a lot bigger or wider or taller than you usually are until you try a door frame. When I had to come into my panel last year, I had to have a spotter and I had to do this. It was very graceful. Yes?
When you're adding the screws, you get to pre-drill the hole in the foam, or do you
No.
put the screw right
No,
in?
I'll tell you that. I use just a hand screwdriver. You want to go really slow and you want to make sure it's going the correct direction. You only get one shot. And the reason for that is, once you put the hole in the core of the foam, you've weakened it. So if you then take that screw out and put it somewhere else, you now have a large hole in the very center of your horn, or whatever you're making. So be very careful, just one. That's, you can't really fill that in if it's on the inside. So bear that in mind. I go very slow and I correct constantly. Yes?
When you're screwing it in, do you put like a little glue in the threads at the end of it to like
Sometimes,
help
yeah.
anchor it?
I usually put like one dab of hot glue and screw through that. In the case of Warbler, you can't really easily hand screw through it when it's cold anyway, so I literally press the tip of the hot glue gun to the point I'm going to screw it through, just to soften it, and then screw through that. It does help in that the Warbler will then get hard around the screw, and the screw threads can't come back through it. So if you're doing a base plate, that it helps. Yes?
That would be good.
I understand the beginning construction points you've been talking about, but when I'm looking at the final details, like on the warbler, like that's the gold pieces there, and you see all those little, what little designs that and patterns you've made
Looking
there.
at this
How are you
bit with
doing
this.
that part there? That even,
I can-
what tool are you using to finish it? Like
I can
you've
cover
painted
that
it.
after, yeah,
You
we'll talk
painted
about
it
that
and then
after.
you've done that, and I'm looking at the horn and I see all the grooves all the way around. I'm like, how did you do that part?
The grooves are either sandpaper or with a Dremel. The
Oh,
Warbler,
okay.
I'll talk about after we cover the painting because that was added after the fact.
Okay,
And
I'm sorry.
that's not, it's not something for everyone. Warbler is a commitment. It requires a heat gun. It requires a lot of finesse, a lot of patience, and money. Yeah, a lot of disposable income. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, so I can talk about that definitely after. I'm not gonna lie, this is the first project I used Warbler for ever, so that was kind of a learning process for me. It's its thing. What time is it?
43.
Speed up a little. All right. So you've mounted it. You got your screw in. Paint. I always base coat it the darkest color. Yes? What was that? Yeah. Yeah, so paint, Darkest color, you want to kind of